The train hummed loudly and moved smoothly forward. The roofs of one-story houses flashed past, soon replaced by endless fields interspersed with small groves. For nearly 20 years, Kate had seen this landscape almost daily. Each season of the year painted it in its own way, like a coloring book, then green, then golden, then white. Now it was summer, and the naughty warm June sprinkled bright yellow caps of dandelions on the fresh meadows with its brush. In half an hour the train would take Kate to the station, and from there it would be 3 more bus stops, and she would be at the center for helping people in difficult situations. She used to work there as a nurse. She is already 44, but she still fondly remembers the period of her studies in medical school and their friendly group. There were only 2 guys for 23 girls. The team gathered motley, but the active attitude, love of medicine, and a good sense of humor united young students and during and after classes. To this day, Kate often revisited albums with photos from those years. Here they are in nursing practice. Here they are in a cafe celebrating someone's birthday. Here they are on a camping trip assembling a tent and fooling around. Unfortunately, life scattered classmates around the world. Contacts were lost and communication was cut off forever. Kate liked her profession, although the work in the center is difficult and the contingent is specific. Employees did not stay here for long. After a few months of work, most of them turned around and left for a warmer place. But Kate was not afraid of difficulties. For her, all her charges are just people in trouble. They came here for different reasons, because of the loss of housing or documents, those who returned from prison, those who were sick, those who had no money for treatment. What unites them is that all of them have no one to turn to for help. Some struggle, others sink even lower. Kate has never judged anyone. Of course, she cannot replace their family, but she is always ready to listen, help, support them with a warm word or useful advice. Her mentees reciprocated and always looked forward to her help. And now the first thing a vigorous grandmother will do is to jump up and demand a blood pressure measurement, complaining that she hasn't slept half a night. The pressure will probably turn out like an astronaut, but Kate realizes that the old woman is just in dire need of companionship and will certainly sympathize with her. Then it will be necessary to fulfill the doctor's appointments for the sick, to distribute the time correctly, so that it was enough for everything and everyone. At home, in the village, a small household awaits her, a couple of dozen hens and a red cow. Only one thing troubled Kate lately. Her daughter, Stacy, was going to marry the son of a very rich and noble family. Kate had only seen them once, but that was enough for her. So much arrogance she'd never met in her life. Her daughter was already ashamed of her village origin, and here the pompous family suppressed her so much that she even agreed to all their conditions, not to invite her mother to the wedding. Fear of her future in-laws paralyzed her will. Stammering and blushing, Stacy voiced the demand of the groom's parents aloud to her mother. Resentment lurked deep in her chest. What kind of matchmakers were these? But she looked into her daughter's happy, loving eyes, as long as Stacy wasn't hurt. And today was her wedding day. She didn't notice when she reached the bus stop. Her gray-haired grandmother, leaning on a stick, was already standing under the door. When she saw her favorite nurse, she smiled. "Kate, hello, and I'm waiting for you." Time flew by unnoticed, and at noon she was torn away from her worries by a phone call. When she read the inscription, "Daughter," on the screen, she smiled and felt warm at heart. So she hadn't forgotten. She wanted to share her joy after the registration. Stacy's fiancé was a descendant of a famous aristocratic family. His parents were proud of their origins, considered themselves superior to others, and reacted painfully to any disrespectful gesture towards their loud family name. Having a successful construction business distanced them even more from ordinary citizens without pedigree. Their only son never needed anything, but was completely dependent on his wealthy parents. Stacy grew up in an ordinary, modest family from the countryside, and from a small age remembered well how hard it was for her mother. After graduating from college, Kate got a job as a nurse in the neurological department. She deftly made injections and put IVs. Patients idolized the young nurse with a light hand, which and injected not painful, and listened carefully. It was there that she met her future husband. A short, blonde-haired guy worked as an ordinary carpenter at the factory, but was very proud of his profession. Most people don't realize that this is creative work. Wood is a living material with its own mood and energy, and objects from it turn out with their own soul, Steve said with burning eyes. Kate liked such passion for his work. The guy was different from many other workers. Did not drink alcohol at all, did not swear, liked to read books. Huge, clear blue eyes made him look like an angel. Despite the attractive appearance, the guy was very shy in the presence of girls. With Kate from the first day, everything somehow went well. Communication was easy and relaxed. As soon as there was free time, the young people sat down next to each other and talked about everything. The chemistry of their first kiss opened the door to the magical world of love and gave them the confidence that they were made for each other. Steve ended up in the hospital because of frequent dizziness and muscle cramps. He did not pay attention to the alarming symptoms until one day he lost consciousness right at the workplace. The diagnosis was unexpected and scary. Steve shrank and stopped coming to see Kate, and then he checked out and disappeared altogether. She guessed what was happening to the young man. Without thinking, she herself went to his dormitory. Seeing the girl in the doorway, the guy was stunned. In the soul splashed, alternating each other, joy and fear. Trying to suppress emotions, he averted his gaze, which could give away his worries. "Steve, where have you been? Why don't you come?" Kate's voice shook and broke, and tears glistened in her eyes. The boy lowered his head and looked sadly at his shoes. "Kate, you have nothing to do with this. I've been diagnosed with an incurable disease." His throat was tight and he struggled to get every word out. "I know everything," she said, "but why don't you come?" Steve took a deep breath and gave out a prepared phrase. "I'm practically an invalid. With such a diagnosis, do not live long. I do not want you to be unhappy." A wave of deep tenderness rose in Kate's heart and made her step toward him. She came very close, breathless, and looked into his sad eyes, and then kissed him first on the forehead and then on the lips. "I love you. I need you both in joy and in sorrow. Remember that, please, forever. And let's never come back to this question again." The girl's words were so saturated with warmth and sincerity that managed to melt the ice shield that Steve carefully built around himself, protecting his delicate and vulnerable inner world. All that had accumulated for the last time in his soul came out with a loud exhalation and a couple of stingy male tears. He grabbed the girl in an armful and pressed her to him with strength and tenderness at the same time. Soon they were married and went to the village where Steve had an old house, inherited from his parents. Kate had never lived in a private house. With interest, she began to master the new life for herself. With enthusiasm, fiddled in the vegetable garden, has a flock of chickens. In the courtyard now followed her tail ran a red puppy, and in the house managed green-eyed cat Philemon. They lived with her husband soul to soul. He literally idolized her. Steve had to register a disability, but he was not going to just sit still, moonlighting as a carpenter or helping people with minor repairs. In his spare time, he tidied up his own home. There was always work in the private house, to patch the roof or the porch to correct. He liked to master various things from wood. In Kate's kitchen, Kate had graceful stools, cutting boards with incredible patterns on the backside. The smell of freshly carved wood wafted through the house. Stacy was born. Steve couldn't find a place to be happy, babysitting the baby girl around the clock, singing lullabies, getting up at night to feed her from a bottle. Although he and his wife no longer discussed the future of his disability, the man still lived each day as one of his last, trying to savor every minute. So he was happy to hold his daughter in his arms, to look into the blue eyes that he had inherited. The first step, the first word, everything seemed like a miracle. Stacy reciprocated, and as she grew up, she never left her daddy's side. He called her a princess, told her bedtime stories about castles and knights, and promised that magic would happen in her life. The girl dreamed that she was languishing in a high tower guarded by an evil dragon. But every time she was rescued by a beautiful prince on a white horse and taken away with him to a wonderful country. As time went on, Steve's illness began to progress, and his arms and legs became very weak. There was no more opportunity to work, and the tiny disability payments were not even enough to just make ends meet. That's when Kate got a job in a skilled trades job at an assisted living center. It was not very convenient to get to work, only to walk to the station for about 20 minutes and then drive. But Kate did not grumble. Knowing that her charges were waiting impatiently for her, she got into a difficult rhythm of life. Steve became quite ill, and soon he lost the ability to move and speak. Kate tossed between her bedridden husband, the household, and work. Stacy had turned 14 by then. She had always tried to help around the house, and now she was taking on most of the care of her sick father. Her heart tore at the sight of the realized gaze imprisoning the immobile body. Those lively blue eyes she remembered from birth. With them she had fallen asleep and awakened. They had always looked at her with admiration and love. Kate taught her daughter how to do therapeutic massage and insistently asked her not to show pity, but to treat her father the same way as before. They were always at ease with him, telling him how they spent the day, joking. The man thanked them with a loving look, unable to respond. And then Steve was gone. Kate was silently pining, a nagging pain in her chest that wouldn't let her calm down. Her mind had long been ready for this loss, but her soul could not accept it. It became easier only when she mentally thanked her late husband for the happy 15 years together, for their daughter, for true love. Stacy experienced the loss very hard. Her father was the whole world to her, and now he was gone. There was a huge gaping void in her life. For several days after the funeral, she practically did not leave the room, and when she finally appeared with a face swollen with tears, the girl already firmly knew that as soon as she finished school, she would leave these God-forsaken places that brought back heavy memories. She decided to enter medical school and study to become a rehabilitation doctor in memory of her father. Purposeful girl day and night read textbooks on profile subjects and began to study medical literature. But at admission, Stacy did not have enough points. Not finding herself in the list of those admitted, she was very upset. A wave of despair came, but the girl immediately pulled herself together, not letting the trouble knock herself out of the planned rut. She decided to enroll next year. She was not going to return to the village. The prospect of going to work on a farm did not suit her. She rented a room with a similarly unfortunate friend, Lara, who had failed the entrance exams, and started looking for a job. To get one step closer to her dream, Stacy took a job as a nurse in the rehabilitation department of a city hospital. It was a chance to see the whole process of treatment and recovery from the inside. Soon the inquisitive, smart girl was noticed, taken with her on particularly interesting cases, and trusted to perform simple treatment procedures. All evening Stacy sat at the textbooks, endlessly repeating and renewing in her memory all the material, so as not to repeat the mistakes of the previous year. She visited her mother from time to time on weekends. Kate was sad and bored, left alone. Work and housekeeping were all she had to do now. Her neighbor Lara, on the other hand, led a busy, happy life, going to clubs and parties, falling in and out of love. She kept telling Stacy that youth was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, that she shouldn't waste precious time on boring activities, and invited her to come along. So the slushy fall and snowy winter passed, and now the ringing drip of early spring was replaced by fresh greenery and the first blossoming caps of apricot trees. The air was filled with the invigorating smell of incredible freedom, and my heart was beating frantically in anticipation of some happy changes. The upcoming exams didn't scare Stacy so much anymore. Her hard work and diligence had paid off. She wanted to relax a little and shake off the stress of the last few months. "Can I come with you?" she asked her roommate out of the blue, seeing that she was going somewhere. Lara was overjoyed and began to inspirationally equip her friend to the ultra-fashionable club. She dressed the girl in one of her many outfits, styled her long hair in a modern way, and put on makeup. In the reflection of the mirror, Stacy was a glamorous, slender, petite girl with a defiant look, an adventurer. She felt uncomfortable in this image, but her experienced friend convinced her that now Stacy looked like a human being. She felt out of place in the club, but soon she was drawn into the rhythm of the music and the lights. Restless Lara ran from one company to another, leaving her friend at the bar with a colored cocktail in her hands. A tall, handsome brunette sat down next to her. They got to talking. The guy's name was Henry. He studied at the 4th year of the economics department. The young man impressed the girl with his manners and erudition. He could easily support a conversation on any topic, even such boring ones as politics and economics. It was very interesting, despite the fact that they had to constantly shout over the loud music. Excited Lara came over with burning eyes and dragged her friend behind her to powder her nose. "Have you met Henry yet?" she asked Stacy in surprise. She nodded confusedly, wanting to know more about her new acquaintance. Lara shrugged her shoulders and made a face. "He's a major. So, he's neither fish nor flesh." Stacy ignored this unflattering comment. What does that frivolous Lara know? She changes guys like a glove, so she's a poor judge of character. At the end of the evening, Henry put the girls in a cab. They agreed to meet tomorrow in the park. Her heart was sweetly tingling with the anticipation of something new and wonderful. Stacy liked Henry even more in the light of day. Something elusive in his appearance or demeanor reminded her of her father, and she thought it was a sign from above. Now that nothing else was in the way of their conversation, the young man kept talking about his studies and the countries he'd been to. The girl opened her mouth and listened to the words of the talkative gentleman. She had nothing to tell. Guy such attention flattered and inspired to action. The first touch, the first embrace, and the tender kiss. Stacy felt over the moon. She could not believe that such a prominent, intelligent, and educated guy could be interested in such a simple girl. A storm of emotions swirled the girl in a whirlwind of love, not giving her a chance to recollect. The whole world focused on one single man in the world, filling the void in her soul after the loss of her beloved father. Just a month later, Stacy found out she was pregnant. The confused girl immediately broke the news to Henry. He scratched the back of his head puzzled and thought, "Yeah, I didn't think it would be so soon." Stacy watched his reaction with bated breath, trying to figure out if he was happy or not. Finally, he pulled himself together and got down on one knee in front of her. "I love you. Marry me." He made an ingenuous proposal. The girl felt her heart fluttering, trying to jump out of her chest, and clasping her eyes shut, she hung around Henry's neck. Events were moving very quickly, even too fast. Stacy introduced her future husband to her mother. She didn't seem to like the twisted twaddle. She didn't criticize her daughter's choice. But the news that she would soon be a grandmother pleased her immensely. At the thought that there will be a little baby, a part of her daughter, in the soul-tender warm wave spilled tenderness. Everything seemed perfect. The only thing left to do was introduce Stacy to Henry's parents. He'd kept quiet about the fact that they'd long ago chosen a bride for him, the daughter of their business partner, and they'd been trying to get their son to marry her. But the lanky, arrogant girl with silicone breasts did not cause him any sympathy. On the appointed day, Lizzie, the young man's mother, was looking forward to meeting her future daughter-in-law. She hoped that her son's choice would surpass the one she and his father had made. But when a short girl in a modest flowered dress and cheap, long-ago unfashionable shoes walked through the door, the woman was stunned. She did not like the girl at first sight. Appearance doll-like, a long braid of blonde hair, huge eyes, small nose, chubby lips, dimples on the cheeks, one word redneck. God, no breed, a frustrated Lizzie thought. Stacy instantly felt that she didn't like her and inwardly shrank back. The woman first of all arrogantly asked the girl who her parents were and what they did for a living. When she heard the answer, she grinned and began a long narrative about the roots of their ancient aristocratic family. "We are the same. Henry has noble blood in his veins, and it is his duty to preserve and pass on valuable genes from generation to generation," she said, hypnotizing the girl with a look full of coldness and contempt. And when she learned that her future daughter-in-law had failed her exams last year, she rolled her eyes and then talked for a long time about her son's success and intellectual abilities. The tea party seemed to Stacy a real torture. The girl was finally confused and did not know how to behave, what to say, so as not to finally embarrass herself. She was afraid to even touch the elegant teacup made of ancient Chinese porcelain, in case this delicate structure would fall apart in her awkward hands. So she rejoiced when the groom offered to call a cab for her. As soon as the car left, taking the upset girl home with it, Lizzie pounced on the frivolous son, words she did not choose. "Henry, are you crazy? One thing is a temporary infatuation, another, marriage. She's not your equal. Where did you find her?" The woman excitedly paced back and forth across the room, gesticulating desperately with her hands. "Mother is some nurse from the village. What's wrong with having such relatives? Out of the stable and straight to the table. Terrible. Mom, but we love each other and we're having a baby." Henry tried to interject weakly. His mother immediately flared up and started squealing. We'll have to find out whose baby it is. I know the kind of people who'd go to bed with anyone. And marry you, you fool. And that's it. Life is settled. Henry thought for a moment. To be honest, he didn't really want to take on such a responsibility. Diapers, screaming and snot. No, not now. And his mother, if she got too angry, could persuade his father to cut him off from his money supply. And then in general, at least hang yourself. Seeing her son's hesitation, Lizzie continued, but more gently. Natalie's a different story. And tall and statuesque, and have you seen the profile? Royal. And parents are so respected. She has long been sighing for you. Marry her tomorrow. We'll arrange it. Henry grinned. She looks like a toad, and she's not smart enough. I'm against it. Her mother exclaimed again. What do you know? But her father has money and connections. You know, our company depends directly on his orders, and continued in a creeping tone. Promised if we are related, we'll provide for your children and grandchildren. And if you marry this hillbilly, you'll count pennies. We won't help you. It's out of the question. I don't know, the boy said hesitantly. Stacy and I have already applied. You can count on your father and me. We'll make all the arrangements. After all, there's more than one registry office in town. And so the day came. Happy Stacy and Lara, as a witness, arrived half an hour early at the registry office. Dressed and cheerful, she stood at the threshold and looked around for the groom. A week ago, disregarding her friend's caustic comments that the groom should pay for everything, she had bought simple white shoes and a modest dress at a discount, which fit her petite figure perfectly. The early term of pregnancy had not yet affected her waist. Lara wove a small strand of artificial pearls into her hair and arranged soft curls on the top of her head. It was nice and elegant. Henry and I agreed to meet right here. I hope you don't support all those stupid outdated customs, buyouts and so on, he asked squeamishly. Only in the countryside do they get married that way. We're going to have a modern wedding. We'll get married and go straight to a restaurant to celebrate. My parents will organize everything. Stacy didn't argue, of course, he knew best. The groom was still out. 5 minutes to go. The registrar came out, a heavy woman in a long dress, and when she heard that the couple wasn't staffed yet, she went back out with a disgruntled look on her face. The first to suspect something was the witness. Are you sure he's coming? Lara asked bluntly. Of course, traffic jams, probably. Convinced justified the bride, anxiously searching in the passers-by favorite. The registrar had moved the time of the two couples' weddings, and Henry hadn't shown up. Oh my God, is something wrong? Said Stacy nervously. Finally, she made up her mind and dialed the phone with a trembling hand. No one answered the phone, which made the bride even more anxious. Immediately, she pressed the call again. Each dial tone resonated in her head with an alarming drumbeat. Her imagination drew terrible pictures of a car accident and something else like that. Suddenly, a woman's voice sounded in the receiver, and Stacy recognized her future mother-in-law. Stop ringing. Henry doesn't want to talk to you, she said unceremoniously, and continued haughtily. He's in love with someone else, and he's just married her at the Central Wedding Palace. So don't call here again. Stacy felt like she'd been doused with a sticky, nasty liquid from a bucket. Her breath came in short gasps, her hands shook, and she almost dropped the phone. She felt dizzy all of a sudden, but Lara managed to pick up and hold her pregnant fiancé. What a bastard, she scolded her friend, who had heard the conversation. Stacy sat helplessly on the steps with her arms around her head. Tears sputtered from her eyes and rolled down in streams onto her snow-white dress. There was only one question in her head. How could he do this to her? Lara ran around trying to save the rest of her makeup and wedding gown, but Stacy didn't care. Her hand reached for the phone. Kate grabbed the vibrating phone excitedly, preparing beautiful words of congratulations. Mom. She heard the woman's voice squealing into the receiver. Stacy was choking through her tears, unable to explain anything. From her intermittent phrases, Kate finally formed a general picture, but she couldn't believe it. God, could people do that? Resentment flared in her head, blood pulsing in her temples. Stacy, wait for me there. I'll be right there, her mother said firmly. It was already evening. The bride was sitting in the square, soiled and mourning. Her friend Lara was sitting next to her, not knowing how to help. My heart was painfully squeezed at the sight of this picture, but there was no time or energy for sentimentality. What restaurant were they going to celebrate in? "Let's go," Kate said firmly, and took her daughter's hand and led her to the cab. Kate confidently pushed open the massive door of the elite restaurant and found herself in a pompously decorated, spacious room. The walls and columns and festively set tables were covered with countless white and cream-colored roses. The guests in fancy dresses were scurrying back and forth in high spirits. The hum of voices, like the sound of a swarm of bees, overlapped the light background music. In the air carried a pleasant aroma of expensive perfume. At the entrance, the receptionist in a strict black and white outfit greeted the newcomers with a nonchalant look and asked if they were on the guest list. Of course they were. Kate realized at once and hurried into the back of the room, searching for the newlyweds with her eyes. She dragged poor Stacy behind her, ignoring her objections. A few of the invitees escorted them with surprised looks, whispering and lost in conjecture. At the main table, drowning in floral decorations, sat the culprits of the celebration. The stately dark-haired bride, in an elegant wedding gown adorned with delicate lace and beads, raised her eyebrows and smiled welcomingly, apparently mistaking them for some distant relatives. But Henry realized at once that a terrible scandal was coming, turned dead pale, and jumped up in fright. Lizzie, ready for a showdown, threw herself into the ammunition, covering her son. She glared menacingly at the unfortunate in-laws, ready to lash out at them at any second. Stacy couldn't bear to look at this despicable family any longer, so she yanked her palm out of her mother's and ran outside. The situation was escalating. But approaching, Kate suddenly passed by this company, right to the stage. She said something softly to the presenter and took the microphone in her hands. She already knew exactly what she was going to do. "Dear guests, I congratulate the newlyweds on their solemn day, and as a congratulation, I want to tell a cautionary tale." Her voice sounded calm and firm. Some guests smiled and relaxed, thinking it was planned by the organizers. Only the groom's mother frantically searched with her eyes for the guards. Once upon a time there was a kind girl, and one day she met a noble prince. He promised her a fairy tale life, and the girl believed him. But later the prince turned out to be a common scoundrel. With these words she threw a scornful glance at the groom. "I congratulate the charming bride on the fact that she is joining a family that has no idea of such concepts as decency, honor, and conscience, who scheduled 2 weddings at the same time and made their cynical choice in favor of the wealthier chosen one. And I also congratulate her on the fact that she is marrying a creature who has no idea of such concepts as decency, honor, and conscience. That she is getting married to a creature, which I can't even call a man, who left his pregnant bride right at the threshold of the registry office." Noticing that 2 huge men in identical formal suits are already rushing towards her, she finished her speech with the phrase, "Live happily ever after if you can." With these words she returned the microphone to the host and, proudly raising her head, left the hall under the general silence. Kate left the restaurant. She felt a little better. She looked around for her daughter. The familiar dress was white about 100 feet away. Stacy was sitting on a bench, right at the bus stop. The girl had fallen into an extreme degree of apathy and was just staring at one point in front of her. She didn't care about anything else. Today, she had experienced the most humiliating day of her life. Her mother sat down next to her and silently hugged her daughter. Words were unnecessary. Her heart bled at the thought of what her daughter had gone through. Is this the eternal female share? Cars passed by. Rare buses disembarked the few passengers who looked suspiciously at the strange couple. A huge SUV of the latest model passed by and suddenly braked sharply with a squeal. A lean, middle-aged man jumped out of the car and waved to those sitting on the bench. Kate even looked back to make sure that the welcoming gesture was for them. The man, seeing their confusion, approached and smiled broadly. "Kate, hi, don't you recognize me?" She was still staring at the stranger with the short haircut and the graying on his temples in bewilderment. Those gray eyes looked as if she had seen them somewhere before. "I'm John. We were in the same class." "Oh, John, I didn't recognize you. You'll be rich." She finally recognized her friend from her distant youth. "I'm not complaining." He smiled. "Is that the daughter?" He nodded at Stacy but didn't say anything about her poor condition. "Yes." Kate was embarrassed, not wanting to get into the details of their dire situation right now. But the old acquaintance realized it and didn't ask any more questions. "Let's go to the car. "I'll give you a ride," he said in a tone that didn't tolerate any objections. "Thank you, John, but we live far away in the village." Kate was uncomfortable to bother the man with other people's problems, though they had been friends once, but a lot of time had passed since then. "Well, that's great. We'll have time to talk more," the former classmate said. All the way the old acquaintance told about himself. After graduating from college about a year, worked in the specialty and realized that this is not quite his path. He entered the Zoo Veterinary Institute. He always loved animals. During his studies he got married, lived with his wife in love and harmony, and everything would be fine. But there were no children. A childhood mumps did not allow John to conceive a child. They decided to adopt. With the appearance of little Alex, the house was filled with a special atmosphere of warmth and joy of the family nest. After graduating from the institute, John was invited to work in a private firm at a horse breeding farm. Unfortunately, a few years later the owner died suddenly, and there was no one to continue the family business. John's heart was bleeding as he watched everything fall into complete disrepair. After bringing the horse farm almost to bankruptcy, the widow finally made up her mind and put the business up for sale. John managed to buy it for cheap. However, at first, while he was raising the farm, the whole family had to tighten their belts. They sold their car and mortgaged their apartment. But love for horses and understanding of all the intricacies of this business helped to raise and expand the business. The son grew up and began to help his father with pleasure. He was an excellent horseman and got along well with horses. He fell in love with a girl. They met for a long time, and the wedding day was already appointed. But last year his wife and son were returning from another city and had an accident. The woman died on the spot and the guy has a severe trauma. His fiancée informed him about the breakup of the relationship right in the hospital room, not even waiting for discharge. Alex is severely depressed. He doesn't believe in recovery, doesn't want to live. As a result of vertebrae compression, his spinal cord was compressed and his muscles atrophied. It seems that the surgery was successful, but he can't get up on his feet. He needs long rehabilitation. He's been to specialists, but no one can negotiate with him. He's so aggressive. "Kate, why don't you come to my house and take care of him? I remember you used to be really good at that. You could get along with anyone," John asked with hope in his voice. "John, I can't. I'm very much needed at work. They can't do anything without me, and I can't leave the household," she answered regretfully. But then a sudden crazy thought suddenly came to her mind. "If you want, take my daughter to work. I taught her a lot. She wants to become a doctor in this field." John thought for a moment and nodded approvingly. In his desperation, he was ready for any option. "Knowing you, I'm sure your daughter will do well," he complimented again. Kate didn't even have to persuade Stacy, who was glad to have a change of scenery and forget, at least for a while, all the troubles. The next day, Stacy arrived at the huge house where she was to work. The mansion impressed her with its size and atmosphere. The whole house was as if woven from small details that created a cozy mood. Colorful cushions on the sofa, light curtains selected in a special way. On the walls, numerous paintings and photographs in frames. John led her into his son's bedroom. He was lying with his back turned to the wall, seemingly asleep. "Son, this is Stacy. She's a medic and will be helping you recover." Alex turned to them, his face flushed with anger, his eyes glittering with rage. "Who the hell is Stacy? I told you I don't need anything," he blurted out and turned away again. John sighed sadly, and then suddenly, mischievously winked at the girl. "Stacy, I hand him into your hands. If he does not want to do well, you can do with this lazy man as you want at your discretion. The main thing is the result." Stacy smiled back embarrassedly. The man walked out, leaving the confused girl alone with her son. She still didn't know how to approach the hostile invalid. "Go away, please," he said quietly in helpless despair. Stacy intuitively sensed that it was best not to touch him now. She went down the stairs to the living room where John was sitting. "So, are you going to fight?" he asked. Only his eyes, which reflected a long-standing longing, betrayed his deep inner turmoil. 1,000 times he had cursed himself for letting his wife and son go on the trip alone. And now, if he could, he would have taken Alex's suffering upon himself. "Don't be offended. He's a good guy. But his mental wound is still not healed, so he doesn't want to think about his body." Let me show you the plot. John built a house for his family not far from the horse farm. The man was eagerly describing to the girl the advantages of his enterprise over other breeders. He proudly showed her the huge stables, the riding arena, and the staging area for the horses. The girl immediately liked these majestic animals. Especially stood out one, snow-white beauty, nervously shifting hooves, elegantly moving long neck and raising silky mane. Her muscular body breathed the energy of strength and agility, and her royal posture gave away the breed. Large, lively eyes scrutinized the guest. This is our pride, Gloria, a thoroughbred, a very rare color. Alex's favorite. They used to be inseparable. She misses him, and he misses her too. Stacy pensively remained to admire the noble animal. She knocked on the patient's bedroom. There was no answer. She knocked louder and firmly pushed the door open. The boy was still unwilling to communicate. Stacy sat down on the chair next to the bed and leisurely began to share her impressions of yesterday's excursion. It's beautiful here. I was at the factory yesterday. I've never seen horses so close. Turns out they're so smart, I didn't even expect them. Alex snorted without turning his head. It was obvious that the conversation had touched a nerve. Stacy continued casually. Your dad showed me Gloria. She's so beautiful. He misses you so much. Don't you want to see her? She watched his reaction carefully. The guy listened with bated breath. Alex, I'll tell you honestly, you have a chance to get back to normal life. But you're going to have to work long and hard for it. Gloria will wait as long as it takes. Alex was touched by her words. He turned his head to her and for the first time looked carefully into her huge, sincere eyes. What should we do? He asked simply. A hell of a lot of hard work awaited them both. For hours every day, Stacy methodically massaged. The spinal stretching and muscle strengthening exercises were exhausting and draining. John, with the help of a factory worker, carried the sick man in his arms down the stairs to the pool for water treatments. Alex found it very difficult to move. His own helplessness in the presence of strangers irritated him greatly, and the excruciating pain wore him down. About 2 weeks passed, but progress was imperceptible. The lower part of his body remained almost uncontrollable. At some point Alex couldn't stand it. In a rage he grabbed a small vase from the nightstand and threw it at the wall opposite. The vessel shattered into many pieces. Stacy didn't even raise an eyebrow. She calmly picked up the pieces and said to the desperate boy, "Look at the strength you've got. Now it's time to put it in the right direction." But the young man could not control his own emotions. The blood rushed to his face and his chest heaved. "That's it," he shouted to Stacy. "I can't take it anymore." "Well, it's up to you to decide if you can or not," the girl told him and walked out of the room with a nonchalant look. She had an idea in her head, but it would require John's help. She left the house and headed towards the factory. Alex lay and looked at the flat square lamp on the ceiling. Heavy thoughts tormented him. How long has he been lying like this? How much longer did he have left to stare at this ceiling? There was no more strength to go over the events of the last year in his memory. A terrible accident, sharp pain in the body and inability to move, the terrible news of his mother's death. Then a faceless hospital room and Lara reports in an icy voice about his decision to part, frightened by the prospect of getting a disabled husband. And then this room. Every morning I didn't want to open my eyes and once again be convinced that nothing in my life has changed. My father, of course, is worried. Although he doesn't show it, he brings doctors from time to time. But all coldly and indifferently repeat the same thing. With the appearance in the house of this girl who does not care what he feels, glimmered the light of hope. But his body treacherously refuses to listen. He yelled at Stacy for some reason, as if she were guilty of something. Outside the window there was a clatter of hoofbeats and snorts. There was a knock on the door and Stacy walked in, her face beaming with a smile. "It's Gloria," said Stacy. "She's waiting for you." Alex woke up. His eyes lit up and his hands automatically pulled back the edge of the blanket. With a groan he lifted himself up and tried to put his feet on the floor. Stacy had already jumped up to put a shoulder up and help. From the street came the nervous neighing of a mare. Some unknown force suddenly swept over the lad and carried him in the right direction. The girl was ready to drag the patient by any means to the window, but immediately she felt that he was standing on his own, though wobbling. Forgetting his weakness and not feeling pain, Alex moved towards the familiar sound and finally overcame those endless 2 meters. Joyful Stacy, supporting the guy, opened the window sash wide open, and he, leaning over the windowsill, shouted tearfully to his white-haired friend, "Gloria, my girl!" When the mare heard her master, she reared up and gave her voice. Happy Alex couldn't stop looking at her. "She's so clever," he said tenderly to Stacy, still keeping his eyes on the horse, and suddenly realized that he was standing a few steps away from his pastel, which seemed to be a prison. He realized that by an effort of will and with the help of the fragile girl he was able to break free from his imprisonment. "Stacy, thank you. If it weren't for you." His eyes looked at her in a new way. The savior turned pink and looked away embarrassed. A familiar car drove up to the house and honked mischievously. Kate was delighted to have an unexpected guest, invited him in and made tea. John sat on pins and needles. He was tempted to share the happy news. "Alex was able to take a few steps today. Stacy's a good girl," he finally said. "Oh, that's wonderful." Kate couldn't hide her excitement. "She reminds me of you from our school days," John said, keeping his eyes fixed on her with tenderness and hope. The former classmates recollected their younger years for a while. "I really liked you," the man said suddenly. "I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me?" She was embarrassed. Her memory suddenly pulled out some moments from the past that proved John's words. Why hadn't she noticed them then? "I don't know. I was young, timid, and now I'm wiser. I think it's stupid to hide your feelings. You can lose time in a man. It happened once, and I don't want to wait for the second time." He gently took Kate's hand in his warm palms, and it was an unexpectedly pleasant gesture for both of them. The woman even had goosebumps running down her body. "You're still the same good, fun-loving girl," he whispered, drawing her into a warm embrace. Kate felt as if she were back in her carefree youth. She even closed her eyes and nuzzled into John's neck. So good and cozy was she. He made her feel cared for and safe. All worries and anxieties suddenly vanished. Fate made a circle of 2 decades and brought them back to their youth. Inspired by the recent result, Alex was now tirelessly practicing all day long. There were no new achievements yet, but he could stand up on his own and walk a few steps on crutches. Stacy and Alex had become friends, and one day over a cup of tea, Alex confessed how much his mother's death and his fiancée's betrayal had hurt him. Stacy only grinned bitterly and told him her sad story. Emotions had taken a back seat lately. It seemed like it wasn't happening to her. Stacy decided for herself that everything that was done was for the best. Thank God that her guardian angel did not allow her to connect her fate with this family. Alex watched the extraordinary girl with admiration, so fragile but strong in spirit. He felt ashamed of his past caprices. She is much worse, and she helps others, lends her shoulder in the literal and figurative sense. He wanted to hug her, hold her close, and protect her from all the troubles of the world. Stacy was embarrassed by his frank look. She lowered her eyes and hastily collected the empty teacups, afraid of further displays of affection on his part. She liked Alex, but the girl firmly decided not to repeat past mistakes. She no longer had the right to frivolity, because now she was responsible not only for herself. Every day the patient's muscles grew stronger, his body stronger, and his steps more confident. Brought in by John, the doctor was amazed at this rapid progress. He said philosophically, "That's what happens when the main cause of the disease is the head," and praised Stacy for the method he had chosen. But the girl felt useless now. Alex no longer needed her prompting and control. She was only slightly adjusting the program. The boy was already able to go down the stairs and with a handful of bread and salt, to go out on the porch, where Gloria was brought every day at his request. The progress of her ward pleased the girl, but the new life growing inside her reminded her that it was time to focus on something else. When the moment was right, Stacy announced to John her decision to return to the village. He looked at her sadly and tried to talk her out of it. "You can stay here as long as you want. I am so grateful to you for my son." But the girl was adamant. "Well," the man sighed, "then tell Alex yourself. Something tells me he won't want to let you go either. If you decide to go, I'll drive you." Stacy packed a small suitcase and went down to the living room. Her former patient was sitting there, watching her silently. The girl approached and smiled in a friendly manner, trying to cope with the excitement that was gripping her. "Well, Alex, my mission is accomplished. You'll manage on your own from here, and I have to go." The guy walked towards her and took her hand. "Stacy, stay. You gave me life. I now cannot imagine it without you." His pleading look penetrated directly into the soul, but the girl gently released her palm and looked seriously into his eyes. "Alex, I'm going to have a baby in 3 months." "So what? I need you both," exclaimed the boy. "You're young. You still have everything ahead of you. Why do you need someone else's baby?" Stacy resolutely picked up her light load and walked outside. John picked up her suitcase and opened the car door. "It's better to hurt both of them a little now than to tear them apart later," the girl tried to reassure herself. She didn't want to leave this place. This house and its inhabitants had given her some of the best months of her life since her father had passed away. She waved goodbye to Alex, who gave her a sad farewell look. Tears choked her as she drove away. She tried to control her emotions, but it was in vain. John was unusually silent and gloomy. As she entered her home, Stacy threw herself on her mom's neck. "Mommy, sweetheart, I don't know what to do." The tears were released and streamed down her face, preventing her from speaking. Kate understood everything without words. She pressed her daughter to herself, trying to calm her down. Her heart was torn to pieces. The everyday life of village life began. The old parental house did not seem so cold and hostile as after the death of her father. The girl now felt and knew that she was loved, pitied, and always welcome here. Stacy was already a mom herself. With age and experience came an understanding and gratitude to her mother for all her labor and sacrifice. Laura called periodically with the latest news. She still entered the institute and settled down a bit. She met her true love, but not in another club, but in the classroom. Now she was happy and excited and actively preparing for the wedding. "By the way," she suddenly remembered in one of the conversations, "your mom, fire. She made such a speech at the Orlovs' wedding. Some of the guests put the video on the internet. No one wants to know them anymore. Henry's wife filed for divorce and her father was their business partner. So that rotten family's business has gone under. Mom started drinking. Son's down on his luck. No money. Now he's hitting the cheap liquor stores." Not that Stacy was happy about other people's misfortunes, but she thought that there was some balance in the world, and karma would sooner or later pay its debts. It had been only 2 weeks since she'd returned home, but thoughts of Alex still haunted her. The gentle touch of his hand and the sad look in his eyes never wanted to be erased from her memory. Sometimes she regretted that she was afraid and did not let such a wonderful guy into her wounded soul. But then she convinced herself that she had done everything right. Alex would suffer a little and forget, live a new happy life, unburdened by other people's problems. The first real snow fell outside. A little frost did not let it melt. Frozen trees gladly put on white coats. From the chimneys of snow-covered houses, grayish streams of smoke rose into the sky. A noise was heard from the street, and then my mother entered the house and let in some frosty air from the street. Her eyes glistened with excitement, and she struggled to suppress a smile. "Stacy, get dressed. I need your help outside." The girl was surprised, but she obediently put on her coat, which she was already struggling to button, and followed her out. There was some stomping coming from down the street. Stacy walked to the gate where her mother was waiting for her. There was also John's car parked there for some reason. Suddenly the girl finally noticed where the strange sound was coming from. A snow-white horse was galloping toward her with its mane fluttering in the wind, knocking out clods of snow with its horseshoes like splashes. This mesmerizing picture so impressed the girl that she did not immediately notice the rider. They stopped near Stacy, and she finally recognized Alex as the rider. He dismounted and took a huge bouquet of roses as white as all around from his father's hands and got down on one knee. "Stacy, I love you very much and I can't live without you. Marry me." He looked fondly at Stacy's rounded tummy and added inspiringly, "I'll be looking forward to our first baby with you." Such a spectacular and sincere proposal took the girl's breath away. Alex's bright, love-filled eyes suddenly reminded her of a glance from the past. Only her father used to look at her like that. In an instant, all doubts were dispelled. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him passionately right on the lips. Kate and John were no longer hiding their relationship. They stood embraced at a distance, admiring this beautiful fairy tale, created by an ordinary man for his beloved. The wedding was played in the summer, a double wedding. Happy Stacy and Alex holding pink-cheeked, blue-eyed Steve and serene Kate and John. They now all lived together in a 2-story mansion. By this time, Stacy had already started medical school, John and Alex had won another prize at an international horse show, and Kate, she was still working as a nurse at the center, but it was more convenient to get there now, in her own car. What could you give up a job you love? A young woman with a bouquet of white roses was walking along the path to the village cemetery. When she came to the grave, she sat down on a bench. "Daddy, my dear, everything turned out to be true. And about the prince and the horse, thank you. I realized the main thing is to wait for my prince. He will definitely come.